Okay, as I said in the last video, I thought the next step 5 years up into the future from my last issue 39 happens to be issue 100, which is kind of a benchmark for them. This was put out in April of 1988. The price of this issue was $2.50. That's right, it's 50 cents cheaper than the last issue. I bet you we never see that again. I bet you that guy's no longer working for White Dwarf. Some of the other prices here, it looks like it's a pound 25 pennies for England, $5.95 in Australia, 6 Deutsche Marks and 80 Pfennigs in West Germany. As you can see, there's a change in the cover in that we're seeing photographs of some pretty incredible models. These were done by a fellow in West Germany. There'll be more shots of this later, but you've got this. These are all scratch-built models, obviously. This is not part of their model range. But boy, they are well painted and nice dioramas. You've got this Brontosaurus down here with a Hoda. You've got this Karnak-looking reptile, but this one has a goblin on it. You've got some science fiction. You've got a Skull Mountain terrain piece, but we still have the White Dwarf artwork here. There has been a change in the title. Role-playing has been taken out. It says Games Workshop presents their monthly games magazine. So role-playing has been dropped out of it, but as we'll see a little bit later in the pages, role-playing has not completely gone away from Games Workshop at this point. So there's about 80 pages in this, which is about twice as many pages as the last issue that we reviewed. So twice the size, 50 cents less. And let's take a look and see what we've got. Some elder pieces here. We're starting to see the models and the really neat paint schemes and stuff. These Elder Dreadnoughts, this is probably not 25 millimeter. I think that this is probably more like 15 millimeter. The Space Marine game that was out, that might be in one of the later issues. I think these are more like Empire scale compared to the actual 28 millimeter stuff that we're gaming with these days. Got an interesting vehicle here. It's like a personal tank. Got this large weapon with these treaded wheels. I think it's called a rapier. Some of the contents now is very much focused towards White Dwarf product. I think there's a single page on here that might mention something that's not actually a White Dwarf product. But everything in here is 40K. This Floating Gardens of Babylon is a Warhammer Fantasy role-playing scenario. Makes up a lot of this magazine, as you will see in the pages to come. There's some 40K stuff in here and lots of models compared to the last issue that we reviewed 5 years ago. Here are some of the new games being shown. This is a Warhammer Fantasy role-playing adventure. These were issued in hardbound. I had a couple of these. I think I ended up selling them on eBay. Dungeon Quest Catacombs is an expansion to the Dungeon Quest, which was also put out by Games Workshop. Games Workshop was putting out a lot of board games at this time. I've got a bunch of them up here. Doctor Who, Kings and Things, The Mummy's Curse, Dracula, Judge Dredd, just a whole lot of different genres, but they were doing a lot of board games, and the board games were starting to have metal figures in them, no more Parcheesi pieces. Here we've got another Dungeon Quest Catacombs board game expansion being advertised. Fist. This is Steve Jackson, one of the founding fathers of Games Workshop. Fist was something that he was getting into. It was like a, oh boy, I don't even know if I can remember what all of that stands for. It's like fantasy interactive scenarios by telephone. I'm surprised with all the new technology that's out for phones these days, that this hasn't made a comeback. But these are just new people coming onto the staff at Games Workshop. Games Workshop staff is growing with painters and graphic artists and all those neat people that bring all of this creativity. This was a new game that was coming out. It didn't come out as Highway Warriors. I think it got a different name. I know I've got that here. But it was a car battle game. Had some models in it and stuff. Here's something interesting from Talisman, which is one of my favorite board games. Had a lot of expansions for it. Some of the Talisman figures, as you can see, these were great for role-playing games too, because they were individuals. This was not armies, but being shown painted here. And this is interesting. This is Uruk-hai before the really great Peter Jackson movies for the Lord of the Rings. They had already had the rights and were issuing models under the Lord of the Rings, but quite frankly, they're just goblins. They're not Uruk-hai. I know that there are people who don't really care that much for that world. They think that it's a waste of time in the pages, but again, I love the models for the that look more like the Peter Jackson films, and the models are what drew me to Games Workshop anyway. I really don't play the Warhammer massive tactic games. I'm more of a role-playing game individual and board games, but I have always loved the models and the artwork. This is some of the detail breakdown of that rapier and the statistics and everything that go with it. 40K is being discussed prominently here, also called Rogue Trader. Nice artwork, well inked, well shaded. Not unlike what you were seeing in the previous edition, but stepped up a notch, I think. Just a little bit more detail, a little less cartoonish. Mummy's Tomb, I have this game. Had a really neat playing board, actually made into like a pyramid, a three-dimensional board, and had 4 metal playing pieces. Like I said, we've gotten away from those Parcheesi pieces in a single die. They're coming into their own and realize that the models have a lot to do with the success of their business. This is the really extensive scenario that's in here. It's called the Floating Gardens of Babylon, or Babylon. Pygmies in Listeria, rather than the lizard men that we're all familiar with these days. And you're going to see a lot of information for this scenario. This was interesting. This is a shield and banner competition, getting those freehand artists to start getting involved and sending their works and showing people that what can be done. That was already starting back in 1988. Just enough artwork to kind of keep you involved in what's going on in the scenario. The pygmies. Now here's something interesting, and I don't know what happened to them through the years. I just can't believe that there isn't plenty of trying to keep this within the camera range. Fellas, sorry if I keep pulling it out. These are Iron Claw squats, 40K dwarves, which I can't imagine that there couldn't be fantastic fluff for these guys, like dwarves anyway. But the only squat that I know of these days is the one that GW gives you the privilege of buying for $15 when you subscribe. In the past, you used to be given free miniatures, maybe up to $20 in bits packs and stuff like that. But these days, what GW does for you is they give you an opportunity to buy a figure, a single metal figure, for $15. Excuse me if I don't get too excited about that. The scenario is continuing. And here you have kind of a picture of the pyramid on the floating garden. That's kind of very much like the terrain from Avatar. And if you haven't seen Terrainaholic, start working on a piece of that. That was an interesting thing that he did with that. But I don't think that's all that new of an idea. It was around back in 1988. But computer graphics brought it to a different level of realism in that particular movie. Goblins, here we've got color a lot more color in the magazine. There's still quite a bit of black and white, but there's also a lot more color introduced along with the photographs of the painted models. Here you've got the layout for the scenario for the role playing and everything. The scenario continues. The expert paint set. I bought that. Probably still got the box around here somewhere. At this time when they were issuing their paints, they were in these, what I considered much better bottles. They were snap top bottles that are much like the foundry paints, if you're familiar with those at all. I think the pigmentation was better on them back then as well, and they certainly didn't dry out the way the new ones have. In fact, I've really kind of gotten away from using Games Workshop paints and have started using more of the Reaper and Vallejo paints. Nice artwork. Now we have monsters coming into the scenarios with the pygmies. Fred the Barbarian. Always did like him. Extremely bulky, heavily muscled, small-headed.